It's been said that every quilt tells a story, and it's so true. But I also believe every quilter has a story to tell. I wanted to hear about the people behind these wonderful quilts and thought you'd enjoy hearing about their lives also. Welcome to A Quilter's Life. Threads in You is the fulfillment of Shelly Martella's lifelong dream to own a combination yarn and fabric store. Her goal is to provide a wide variety of exceptionally made fabrics and yarns from around the globe that will support the creative needs of sewing enthusiasts and fiber artists. Shelly is thrilled to finally be working in a career that lets her indulge her passion for beautiful fabrics and fibers. Shelly created the Threads in You website not just as a yarn and fabric shop, but as a friendly online destination where quilters and knitters come to create. Shelly, thanks so much for joining us on A Quilter's Life.
Well, thank you for having me, Paula. It's a pleasure and an honor to be invited to your show, and I'm excited to be here and to talk about all things Threads in You and all things quilting.
Oh, wonderful. Now, it's been almost a year since I met you. I met you at QuiltCon 2024.
Correct.
And share about where you were.
Okay, we were in Raleigh, North Carolina at the time. I was vending at QuiltCon 2024, as you said. And it was the first time I had been in that city. I actually really, really love Raleigh. I thought it was a welcoming town. I thought the restaurants and the downtown life was really fabulous. And I was looking forward to going back in 2026. So they'll be doing that again. But my favorite thing, of course, is being a vendor at the show, meeting all the quilters, showcasing all of the products that I bring. Because whenever you prepare for a show of this magnitude, it's a lot of work. And one of the most rewarding things is when you're at the show, you're all set up, customers are coming in and they're oohing and awing about what you brought. It's just so fabulous. It's such a uplifting experience for me, and I never get tired of it.
So you mentioned getting to go back in 2026. Mm-hmm. Are you headed there to do this year?
Well, 2025 I could not do in Arizona due to a medical appointments that I have with my husband. He's a 4-time cancer survivor, so we are working through that. And then hopefully in 2026, when they go back to Raleigh, we'll be able to attend. He loves doing the shows with me. He doesn't always do the shows with me. He has a full-time job, but whenever he can, he loves joining me on the road. So yes, I am planning to go back to Raleigh in 2026. I usually sponsor QuiltCon, so that assures me, the opportunity to be there every year. So hopefully, God willing, and everything works out. So
we'll see. And it's wonderful to be able to work with your spouse.
Oh, yeah, we really enjoy traveling together. I just wish it was more often, but he promises when he retires, that's what we're going to do. I started this business when I was 50, so it's been 13 years traveling and showcasing fabric. And I'm kind of thinking, how many more years do I want to do this, right? But I love it so much. It's really hard to think of myself not doing it, but I do realize that with age comes limiting factors of availability for my body to respond to the long hours of traveling, all of that. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's different vending than just attending.
Correct. And it's definitely different being a vendor versus being a shop owner. A lot of people have a brick and mortar, and I've often been asked, Shelly, please open a store. Why don't you open a store? The reason I didn't open a store is because I have had full-time careers, and I just really felt that I wanted something less permanent. And having the website, of course, full-time, always there for any quilter that needs it, but also being able to sleep in till 10 if I want to, or not take a show if I want to go on vacation or have appointments, what have you. That flexibility Being a vendor has always been more appealing than being a shop owner.
Uh-huh. Well, let's go ahead and jump back to sharing, where were you born and raised?
Okay. I was born in Chicago, and after about 1 year old, the family moved to Detroit, and I was a resident of an area where all of the Motown artists lived, and it was very exciting. I was probably till about 9 or 10, lived in that area of Detroit. And directly behind me was Smokey Robinson's house. Marvin Gaye lived on the corner. And I went to elementary school with Gladys Knight and the Pips Kids. So it was a really fun, artistic childhood. Being around all of these musicians and artists and creatives, I think really helped me forge my fondness for art. Just seeing all of that creativity around me. My brother is a lead guitarist. He's a musician with Morris Day and the Time. He's the lead guitarist for that band. My sister went into theater arts, and I love to draw and paint. So I went into advertising for college. But probably around 13, we moved to California. And I've been in California all of my adult life until about maybe 10, 12, 13 years ago when we moved to Texas. And I'm a resident of Texas now. But yeah, we had a really, really fun childhood. My parents got divorced, however, and that caused, of course, the moving. That happened really early on. So I was really raised by a single mother and lots and lots and lots of wonderful aunties.
So you still were able to grow up around cousins and your aunts?
Oh, yes, definitely. Because my mom, had 4 kids and worked, and she was a nurse in the beginning of her career, but put herself back through school to become a anesthesiologist. And because of that schooling and work schedule during the summers, we were shipped off to grandparents and aunts and uncles. And I was fortunate enough to spend every summer in Texas with my aunt. And she taught me, along with all my cousins, how to sew. Early on, I gained the knowledge of knitting and sewing and crocheting and all of those arts, probably from about the age of 9, I want to say. So I can remember my first garment that I sewed probably was around when I was 9 or 10 years old, and just took off from there. Loved the arts, loved the quilting and using things, making things with my hands. I think that was the real draw for me. I was really heavily into embroidery at that time. The big thing was to get a jean shirt or a jean jacket, and they had iron-on transfers where, you had Disney characters, what have you, and you just embroidered the pictures onto your jean jackets. And I went crazy with that. And I remember one of the things I did when I first got married was my husband had several brothers and sisters, and they had wives, and, I made the whole family, embroidered little T-shirts and things for Christmas presents. That got old really quickly because it was such a big family, right? I didn't do that every year, but I just love making things with my hands. And so I think it was a natural progression for me to have threads in you, because when I retired, and I know I'm skipping around a little bit, but after I got married, I was working in retail. I worked at Nordstrom's as a salesperson, and that's where I really learned and honed my selling skills. I always think everything that you go through in life is important that leads you to where you're going to end up. And I really learned a lot from them and took that knowledge with me when I opened up Threads and You. But prior to that, we moved, my husband and my 2 kids, we lived overseas. And I learned a lot about fabrics, and I learned how to quilt overseas, seriously quilt overseas. I remember making little patchwork blankets when I was young, but learning the art of quilting and taking classes and everything happened when I lived in Australia. So for about maybe 4 or 5 years, we lived in Singapore, Japan, Australia, South Korea, all of these places. Especially in South Korea, what would happen is at 8 o'clock, I would drop the children off to school. And at 3 o'clock, the music teacher would pick the kids up and take them to music. And then the music teacher would take them over to Taekwondo lessons. And by 5 o'clock, the Taekwondo instructor would drop them back home. So from like 8:30 to 5, I had all of this free time. And my husband's company didn't allow spouses to work. So they had a lot of expat activities like brush painting, Taekwondo, art, quilting, all of these things. So I was very active doing all of these different activities, and it was a real magical time because I really got a chance to learn a lot and see a lot of the different countries that I lived in. And I think that's what gave me my appreciation for textiles. I really was able to delve into the history of the fabrics, delve into the actual making of the fabrics. And that helps me, of course, when I open Threads New to bring all of these different fabrications to the United States and, of course, ultimately to the quilt shows.
So you got to live in so many different places. Did you say that's where you learned quilting?
Yes. When I was in Australia, I belonged to a group called, we were in Perth, and it was the Petroleum Women's of Perth group. And it was for a lot of course, the expat wives from all over the world. There were different oil companies and things. My husband works for an oil company, and so that's why we traveled. I was part of the activities group where I would organize different activities for the members. And we would have a monthly luncheon, and every month we would get together and we would decide what activities were going to be part of the group. And you'd have to sign up and pay your fee. And we would do the different activities, things like going on boats for manicures and things, just a bunch of really fun things that women like to do, going to the museums and having lunch, that type of thing, and having a curator take you around the museum. And then one of the groups that was available was a quilting group, and they would meet monthly and we would get together and we would do quilting and, of course, share projects and do workshops once a month. So I, of course, learned different skill sets about quilting with this group. And I had never learned how to do it before living in Australia. I was a real big knitter. So they invited me to come to the quilt group, but they said, bring your knitting and you could do that while we're quilting. And so eventually I stopped knitting and started quilting more. And I made my first quilt, took a class at one of the local shops there. And it was a quilt using Jenny Beyer fabric, I believe. Yeah, Jenny Beyer fabrics. And, of course, I loved her use of color. I don't know if you remember my booth at all, but it's a riot of deep jewel tone colors. Very rarely do I have a lot of pastels in the booth. I just love jewel tones. So my first quilt was a Jenny Beyer, kind of a celestial knot type of quilt. And it was just a little, I want to say it's about the size of to cover a small ottoman. It wasn't quite wall hanging size. It was a little bit smaller than that. But I really enjoyed picking the fabrics for that quilt. And then another time I remember that I really enjoyed an outing where I went onto a ranch. There was a rancher in Australia where he had built a cabin for his wife. They had 12 beds, all covered with the most fabulous quilts. And downstairs of the building was the common room, the sewing room, and then a little quilt shop. And so we spent the weekend at this retreat on the ranch. And they would bring us our meals and we would have tea at 10, breakfast, and then lunch and dinner. And in between that, we would have quilting instructions. And the whole group, there were 12 of us, of course. And we had to decide on one project. So we all did a log cabin. It was really, really fun. And I just wish more people were doing that type of thing here in the States, because getting together with groups of quilters is such a gas. I just love it. So, yeah, I have a friend that does quilting retreats, and hopefully I'll get to go on one of hers this spring. I'm looking forward to doing that. So we'll see. But yes, my very first entry into being a quilter was in Australia.
I do think that there are more people opening up quilt retreats. It seems like I've heard of several new ones lately.
Yes, my friend Tina Johnson, she runs Tenderly Stitched Quilt Retreats. That is here in Texas, and it's a 3-day retreat, and she picks different topics. Last time she did one on all curves. So people that wanted to learn how to do curves and quilting, like clamshells and things of that nature, she ran classes on that. So next one that she's doing is in April, and she has a Facebook page, so you can find her there. She's one of the people that we talked about earlier.
Well, I want to jump way back for a minute.
Okay.
Do you have a special childhood memory?
I do. It's a funny story. I remember when I was visiting my auntie one summer, I was very interested in making this jumpsuit. We went to the fabric store and got fabric to make the jumpsuit. And it was a jumpsuit that was a one piece, kind of a short jumpsuit. And it had a matching chiffon skirt. So if you can imagine, the jumpsuit fabric was all cotton. And then you had a sheer chiffon skirt that attached around the waist, but it was open in the front. So the jumpsuit would show your legs, but your back would be covered, right? So we made this jumpsuit together, my auntie and I. And my other aunt, who I was visiting, agreed to take me to the store and purchase matching white go-go boots. And I wanted an Afro wig. And so I got an Afro wig, white go-go boots, this really bright colored, it was yellow and black and pink fabric jumpsuit with matching skirt. And I wore that home on the plane back to California. And back in those days, the planes pulled up on the tarmac and there were the steps that you'd have to walk down. And then your family and friends could be waiting for you at the edge of the tarmac, right? So here I am coming down the steps in my Afro wig, my go-go boots, my outfit, thinking I look like the belle of the ball, right? And I look down and my brothers and sisters see me and they're actually rolling with laughter. I mean, doubled over on the tarmac, rolling, laughing so hard. And it just, my bubble just burst. I was like, no, they hate it. So yes, that was quite the memory. I will never forget that. And it is my very funny sewing story.
I am so glad you're laughing at that. It could have been a really sad, upsetting story, but that is great.
Yeah, you gotta laugh, otherwise you cry. But yeah.
Do they still tease you about it?
Well, it put me off for sewing for a long while. But no, we haven't talked about that in a while. But every time I mention it, I'm sure they will now because they will listen to this podcast. So I'm sure we'll laugh about it.
Yeah. What did you learn at Nordstrom that helped you with your business now?
I really learned from Nordstrom is the techniques of selling. And that is an art. It's not something that most people are born with. And one of the things that they always strived is to make sure when you're talking with your customer, you show them everything that you have available. So what they would say is if I was, say, for instance, working at the jewelry counter and someone came in for a pair of earrings, I would show them what I had in earrings, and then I would ask the questions, can I show you something in the dress department to go with these earrings? Can I show you shoes to go with the dress? What about your husband? Does your husband need a new tie? So basically, there were all these different departments in Nordstrom's, and my job was not only to work in one, but it was to really think about showing the whole store to the customer. And it was really one of the, I think, pioneering ideas behind being a personal stylist. So it was the idea of every single employee was trained to be that customer's personal stylist. And I thought that was such a good novel idea. So now I translate that into my business. People will walk in, and you've seen customers carry a swatch of fabric and they're walking around the show trying to match. Well, not only do I help them with that piece of fabric, but I also will show them other things that they hadn't thought about. And 9 times out of 10, that customer ends up being completely happy with completing their project and finding something that matched their original swatch of fabric, but also they have ideas for the next project, or they've purchased something that they had been looking for but hadn't found because I've taken the time to show them everything that we have in the booth. Those are some of the things that I really think have helped the success of my business.
Mm-hmm. Were there other jobs that you had between?
Oh, of course. After we returned from overseas, I had been probably home about 6 months, 7 months. And the thing about being overseas, it's very interesting as far as the social dynamics. I was so busy socially. I was in my home maybe about 15 minutes in Australia before the neighbors came knocking, inviting me over to barbecues. And when I returned home to the United States, it was probably about a good 3 or 4 months before I even met anyone on the street. So it was kind of a letdown, and I was becoming bored. And the kids were in middle school and getting ready to go into high school. And I thought, well, I need a job. So I was talking to some of my relatives, and one of them worked at Wells Fargo Bank. And he said, well, why don't you come and work with us at Wells Fargo? So I ended up getting a job in banking. That basically started my finance career. And I started as a personal banker, went into business banking, went into brokerage, and I became a stockbroker with the bank, and then ended up managing locations for Wells Fargo. When I moved to Texas, I was doing dual duty by being a bank manager and their local broker for a branch here in Texas. And then probably about 2-3 years of working here in Texas, I got recruited by Merrill Lynch and went over to Merrill Lynch as a broker there. Probably when I hit my 50th birthday, I just wasn't very healthy. It was a high stress job, and I was kind of burnt out, I'd have to say, on that field. And so my husband got an opportunity to go back overseas, and I ended up just retiring when I turned 50. So I left banking and finance. And after about a year, we returned back, and I was once again in that position where I just felt like I needed to do something. And that's when I started Threads and You. My husband has always been in my corner with about any crazy idea that I come up with. So he was like, sure, go ahead and open that quilt store. And we were looking at spaces in Texas, and to have a space, it was so expensive. I just couldn't decide to open up a shop, brick and mortar, and decided just to go online. After about a year of being online and not really having a lot of sales because no one really knew Threads and You, you're up there with millions of different businesses doing the same thing, trying to open a web store. So I decided to go to a couple quilt shows and see how that went. And it was so well received, and I really enjoyed the work. Basically, that's how I started just vending. And I've been doing shows for about 10 years now, and just love it so much. And people always think that what I do is glamorous because we travel and we're always, showcasing all these wonderful products and everything, but it's a lot of work and hard work. People don't realize what we do is extremely physical. You have to be not only physically fit, but also detail oriented. You are logistically moving a lot of small parts, and having to have that all come together seamlessly is not easy.
I always think about there are so many details that we usually don't realize because there's so much going on in the background of almost any job.
True. One of the things I've discovered is that every show is different. You think you're going to put your booth together the same way that you did the last show, but it never works out that way. So being able to flip and pivot is a skill that I think is definitely required in my job.
Yeah. We talked about you vended at QuilCon. What other shows have you vended at?
Pretty much all of the majors. Of course, Houston International, I do every year because that's my hometown. And Houston is the largest show in the nation, and it encompasses not only quilters from, of course, all around the US, but also internationally. You get people from Japan, from Australia, from Israel showcasing their work. And it's always the biggest show and the most well attended show out there. I look forward to that every year. It's always the first week of November. But now, after several years, they have now decided to make it in October. But that show is definitely not to be missed. The Road to California is my first show every single year in January. I always do that. And because I love the Midwest, I always do the Minnesota Quilt Show. And Madison Quilt Show is called the Great Wisconsin Quilt Show. And that one is in conjunction with PBS and Nancy Zeman Productions. And Nancy passed, of course, but they still have the show in her name and very well publicized by PBS Wisconsin. So that's always a fun show to do. And then, of course, I have done many, many yarn shows because Threads and You is a dual business. I sell quilt fabric and, of course, yarn for knitting and crocheting and weaving, spinning, all of that. And I would do Vogue Knitting Live in late January, sometimes February in New York. And, of course, the Stitches shows and all of the other yarn shows that I could. Houston has a nice little local yarn show that we do as well. I travel probably about 10 and a half months out of the year doing shows. It's quite intensive. But this is my first year that I'm starting to do less. So 2025, I probably will do about 7 months of traveling this year.
That's still a lot of traveling.
Yeah. But I love it. It's nothing like being on the road and being by yourself with your own thoughts or a good podcast and finding out wonderful information that otherwise I wouldn't have had time to do. Because when I'm working, either cutting fabric or getting, things put on the website, it's 9 a.m. to 12 o'clock at night sometimes, days. I'm constantly busy preparing for the show. So I rarely have time for pleasures of listening and just taking the time for myself to be with myself. And that's what the road affords me. And I do like that.
Uh-huh. I'm curious, you didn't mention H&H in there. Is it fairly new to quilting? But I thought it had a lot to do with yarn.
Yes, H&H is a wholesale show. So it is a buying show. It's for the retailer. It's not for the consumer. And this year, they announced that in 2026, they will be doing a retail show. So in the past, the people that put on the Houston International Show always had a spring show in Chicago or some part of the Midwest. And they stopped doing the spring show. And so now H&H has stepped in to say they are going to bring that back. So we will be having a spring show in May, and I believe it's the week after the wholesale show, or it might be the week before. But that starts 2026. But yes, that will be happening.
Oh, cool. Shelly, is there anything else about your family that you wanted to share?
Just a very good, happy childhood growing up. I didn't really have a lot of contact that much with my father. He did pass in 2020 during COVID. He got COVID and died. My brother passed during COVID. He died from pancreatic cancer. So that time was very hard for the family. But all in all, we, remain really close. We have a really close-knit family. And having that support system, of course, is everything. And of course, my immediate family, my husband and I have two wonderful boys in their 30s and single out there. So if any ladies are looking, come my way. Because I want grandbabies. But my kids are great. I'm really proud of both boys. They're doing wonderfully. Yeah, that's pretty much it. My mother is going to be celebrating her 85th birthday in May. So we're going to have a big party for her then in California. So I'll be going there. But yeah.
Oh, nice. And talking about generations or grandbabies yet to come, thinking of your great, 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 great grandchildren you hope to have, how do you think they will look back on your life, and what do you think they'll think of you?
I'm hoping that they'll look back and read about my accomplishments, especially in regards to the business. I hope they think of me a little bit as a pioneer. When I showed up on the scene as a quilt vendor, I was probably the only one in regards to, there weren't any African American vendors selling yarn and fabric, especially the types of fabrics that I carry. I carry Japanese fabric and organic fabrics and apparel fabrics and things like that. So there wasn't anybody that looked like me on the sales floor for me to model myself after. I really just came in being an individualist and being very unique in that regards. And I hope they will see that as an accomplishment. But also, I hope that they will realize that because of that, I had a lot of opportunity to mentor vendors that looked like me. And now there are many, many more on the sales floor. And I'm really happy and proud of that accomplishment. One of the vendors, especially Kina Quilts, I met her as a customer. And now she's teaching at all of the quilt shows. She bends at the quilt shows. When I see her, she always thanks me and gives me a big hug for showing her the way. And that's one of the great things about doing something you love. If you're able to pass your knowledge on and help other people, it's such a blessing. It's such an uplifting feeling. So I'm hopeful that my great, great, great grandchildren will see me as someone that was able to help people and show other people the way.
That's wonderful. And second, with going on with that question, is what message would you like to leave or say to your great, great, great grandchildren?
I would like to say no one was born an expert. Life's a journey and we all have to find our own way. But I was very fortunate that I discovered my niche early on and before it was too late. And having a passion about your work and what you do in life is everything. Because if you really, really, really enjoy what you do, it's really not work, it's more play. And you don't feel the burdens and the stress that you do when you're doing work that you really don't enjoy. So if I had to pass on any life's lessons, I would have to say, find something that you enjoy doing in life and make that your passion. And you will be very profitable from it because when you're passionate about something, people see that and that translates into success.
Feel like you're preaching to the choir here. That's what I would tell my kids as they were growing up. Do what you love and you haven't worked a day in your life.
Exactly. And you don't realize that until you've actually done it. Because, of course, when you're going through life, raising kids, and you do what you have to do, you do what is needed for the family, for yourself, whatever. But you don't really think about slowing down and thinking what's best for you. Unless, of course, you're born with some type of talent and you know that you want to do. Like my brother, for example, he is a musician and he's known from probably toddler stage that that's what he wanted to do. And he's always done that for his job. So he's always been one of those ones that is fortunate to know what his passion is, and he's made a success out of it. But that's very rare. A lot of people have to go through different paths in life before they really find out what they really love doing. It's never easy, but it can be done.
It can be. You mentioned working at the bank, and it was a relative that helped you get the job at the bank. Did you have any inkling of banking is what I want to do, or that just came because the opening was there?
Yeah, it was just a necessity. I wanted to work and do something with my time, and I wasn't really looking to go into the field. But once introduced to the field, I'm just one of those people that I'm very competitive, number one, and I have to be excellent in everything. I was a good student. I like to excel at things that I do. So it wasn't something that was on my radar, but once it fell into my lap, I really excelled in it and did well in it in that field. And once again, as we talk about going down through life's path and all these experiences leading to what you want to do finally with yourself, I have to say that really helped me in my business, because knowing how to do accounting and all of those things in business is very important. So not only did my retail experience, but also my banking career has helped me be successful with the current business that I'm running. So I'm really grateful for that, even though it was really stressful.
Yeah. You mentioned Wells Fargo. My dad was a loan officer at Bank of America. But when we lived in Sonoma, California, a Wells Fargo opened up, and I was probably 4 or 5. We went down there where they opened up because they were giving rides in a stagecoach.
Oh, yeah. I used to have to order the stagecoach over for holidays, and we would have those come out every year, and the kids would get in, take pictures, that kind of thing. It still was happening.
Wow. Because I thought it was just something that was done 60 years ago.
Oh, no. Stagecoach is still very much a part of Wells Fargo. They have them in every state and have them show up at your bank for an event. Yep.
Wow. I really had no idea they were still doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, besides quilting, you mentioned you did embroidery, knitting, crochet, I think. Are there other crafts that you have done?
Well, I'm a huge knitter. I knit every day, and I like to paint. I remember when we were in Australia, one of the houses that we lived in had this 20-foot wall. It was huge. It was the tallest wall I've ever seen. And it was completely bare. And I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to paint something to put on that wall. So I promptly went down, got some canvas and painted a picture and put it up on that wall. And it hangs in my office today. So that was a fun experience over there with painting. But yes, I'm definitely an avid knitter, but I have done everything from woodworking to, like I said, crochet or painting, or I've done mosaic tile working. Nothing to do with welding or any type of jewelry art where you're using fire or anything of those natures, but that also appeals to me. But yes, I love working with my hands, so I would try anything once in that regard.
I always thought the mosaics are so much like putting the pieces together in quilting. So Experience the Outdoors is an annual thing here locally, and they had one class to work with mosaics, and it was harder than I expected.
Oh, yes, cutting tiles with those pliers.
Well, they had just little tiles. We just made a little coaster, but still fitting those tiles in, I just was a little surprised that it didn't go as smoothly as I expected it to.
Yeah, it's definitely an art. It takes a little patience. It's fun to do, but it is time consuming because, you think you can go in and place the tiles down right on top of the glue, and then you're going to put the coating over, you're done. But you really have to align them. And if you're cutting the tile from scratch, you have to make sure it's the right size. So it really is a little finicky. But the outcome of doing all that labor is definitely worth it. I've seen some masterpieces in mosaic tile that have taken people many, 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 many days and months to accomplish. But other ones can come together quickly, just like any other craft. But it's a fun craft.
And it's a craft that lasts because I still use those coasters.
Yes, I made a table in Australia, and I have that in my kitchen right now.
So do you think any of those other hobbies that you do or did show up in your quilts?
Well, yes and no, because of my knitting, I always carry sheet fabric. So I did I love to knit quilt one time. And I used that not only at these quilt shows, but also at the yarn shows. And that was very popular, very well received. But I have to say, yes, because of the knitting and the love for wool, anything to do with that theme that produced in quilt fabric, I will always buy and I will always carry in my store.
Do you happen to have a favorite quilt, whether it's one you made or you've seen somewhere?
Yes, I absolutely think the best thing I've ever seen put together in fabric was the quilt that first won an award in the Road to California show. It won Best of Show. It was called Silk Road Sampler by Melissa Sabeka, and it was in 2016. And it's a picture of all of these beautiful silk pillows in a row, like if you saw them on a shelf at a housing goods store or whatever. But it was all beautiful silk pillows. The quilt was called Silk Road Sampler, and it is one of my all-time favorite quilts. I really, really like that one.
So do you remember walking up and seeing it for the first time?
Oh, yeah. And there was another quilt. I don't remember the name, but at the Houston Quilt Show, it was a panoramic style. So it was probably, I want to say, at least 15 by 60 feet in length. And it was, I want to say, floral in essence, some kind of landscape quilt. But it was really long and really huge. And I remember that making such an impression. And I was just in awe at the amount of sewing that went into producing a piece of that size. And every single quilt that I've seen, and God knows I've taken so many pictures and through the years of all these fabulous quilts, but each one is such a representation of the person's frame of mind or the type of art that that person is into. And it just reminds me of the thrill of art in its essence. If you have something that you really love doing, especially quilting and coming up with the scenery in each of the quilts that are on display at the International Quilt Show. It's like walking into a museum and seeing art on the wall and marveling at the artistry and the excellence that you see in every single piece. And every time I go to these shows and I see these quilts on display, I leave there so inspired. I just want to go straight to my sewing machine. But then again, that rarely happens because I got to prepare for the next show.
Is there a tool that when you use it, you are just so happy that you have that tool?
Yes, recently I purchased an electric cutter. It's called the Pink Power Cutter. And because I cut so many yards of fabric. I sell the fabric in 1 yard increments. It takes a lot of time to cut that. And I used to use a rotary cutter, but the Pink Power electric scissors are my new favorite tool. It's wonderful. So yes, I highly recommend those for people that do a lot of straight cutting. If you're just cutting a straight line and you want it to be precise, that is the tool to use. And shout out to Kai rotary cutter blades, because Kai blades are the best. I've used those for many, many years, but now my Pink Power cutter is taken over as my new favorite tool.
I bet you could cut quite a few layers with that.
You can, but I still like doing the accuracy of just one at a time. I have another reliable industrial cutter that is more aligned with cutting 20, 30 yards at a time in one cut. You can do quite a bit and go quite high. It is a huge blade, and I rarely use that one. The logic behind that is I think it takes just as much time to lay one piece of fabric and cut it as it does to stack 10 or 20 pieces and then cut that, because you still have to lay it out and make sure they're all straight, correct? So it's easier for me just to cut one and lay it out and go to the next one.
That makes a lot of sense, because when you're starting to stack, you have to line the fabric up, not only that it's straight, but along with the other ones you've laid out. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, correct.
When you're getting to make a quilt, is there one step that you particularly like, or do you like each step along the way?
I like each step, except for my least favorite part of the quilting process is probably the binding, because I don't know, I guess it's the final step and it's like the process is over with. And I guess in my mind, I really don't want it to be over with. So I hate the ending. I love the joy of picking the fabric. And usually, of course, people will see a pattern that they like and they want to do the pattern. For me, I see the fabric and then I want to create a quilt with that fabric. I don't know if that's true with most people, but I just find that the most fascinating part. I love large blocks because I don't like doing smaller blocked quilts because I love seeing the fabric. So most of my quilts have squares on point or rectangular blocks just because I don't want to cut the fabric. I just don't. Like I was saying earlier, in my booth is a Charlie Harper quilt. And Charlie Harper was a very famous artist from Cincinnati, Ohio. And he was very famous for drawing animals in such a stylized way that was considered very modern for his time. He was around the time of Frank Lloyd Wright, and the Deco influence really came into his work. His artwork is in the Smithsonian, and one of his favorite subjects was birds. And so we were fortunate after he passed that his family decided to allow Birch Organic Fabrics to have his artwork on organic cotton. And I had never sewn with organic cotton before. And I decided after several years, because I started carrying Charlie Harper fabric in 2013, and I finally made a quilt in 2017 with this fabric. I had collected some of the end of bolt pieces. So I decided to do this quilt, and it was large rectangles. And I was very impressed with the quality of the fabric. And back in those days, absolutely no one knew who Charlie Harper was. Because I had gone to art school for college, I knew who he was because art history, I learned about him in college. And when I saw that they had his artwork on fabric, I was mesmerized. I bought it for the store. I've been carrying it ever since. And now it's gained in popularity and several people carry it. You can find it pretty readily now. But that's one of the things that I also want to mention that is unique about what I do. I really try to find fabrics that you just don't find in your local quilt store. I want to be known as the supplier out there that has hard to find or unique fabrications and unique textiles. And that really has translated into many people that shop with me winning awards at these shows. I can't tell you the thrill of walking into a show. Like recently, I just did the road to California. And the very first quilt that you saw when you walked into the show hanging from the atrium was a quilt that was done by quilt fabrics that are sold in my booth, and a pattern that the artist purchased from me in my booth. And to me, that is one of the most rewarding parts of what I do. Not only helping people select their fabrics and their patterns, but helping them bring their designs to life. It's such an immense feeling of appreciation and respect for these designers when they can translate a piece of fabric into a beautiful work of art. And I just love seeing that. And that's definitely one of the reasons I do what I do.
Yeah, it's so much fun to be part of this community.
Exactly. And that's another thing that I found about being in this industry. I've never had a job where everyone you meet is smiling. No one is cross at a show. You will never see, things go wrong, of course. Bad things can happen, but everybody has such joy when they're walking through the shows and talking to the vendors and seeing the quilts on display. It's just a real magical place.
It is. What was your worst quilting experience?
Oh boy, do I have a story for that. It's kind of sad, but it's kind of funny at the same time. But I was at a show in Dallas and just, vending. And when I vend, I have a chair by my register, and it's usually on the outside of the booth. At the show, a lady walks up, grabs my chair, and sits down in it, sitting there for some time. And I didn't mind it because there weren't any other chairs. And I was like, oh, okay, well, perhaps, she's tired. That's all right. And I was busy with customers, so I couldn't really ask her what was going on. And then her friend comes up and they're talking. And all of this took place for about 20 minutes. They were there for quite some time. So the friend starts to walk away and the girl's still sitting there. And the next thing I know, she starts projectile vomiting all over the floor, onto the booth. I had a piece of fabric hanging from the side of the booth. It got on the fabric. It got on the vendor's next to me table. She had a tablecloth with some bits and pieces. It got on her stuff. And they had to call the ambulance. The paramedics came, put her in the wheelchair, everything like this. Of course, the cleaners came to clean. I had to take the fabric down, throw it away, because once you get stuff like that, you can't sell it. It was like a mess. And here's the kicker, though. Maybe about an hour later, one of the vendors came back around and said, the lady that got sick in your booth? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, she's still walking around. She refused to go to the hospital and she refused to leave the show. I said, what? At first, I was upset because she ruined expensive fabric. She never came back to apologize or anything like that. She went and bought another T-shirt and was walking around shopping at the show, just like nothing had happened. And then I thought about it for a second. And I said, the door to exit the building was literally like 10 steps across the aisleway. So she could have left, but she chose to stay there and sit there, right? So who does that? And so I began to feel sorry for the customer in a way that I was thinking maybe she was mentally disturbed, because she told the paramedics, no, I'm fine. This happens all the time. So if she knew this was going to happen, why didn't she leave the show? Why sit there and make such a huge mess? So I thought to myself, well, maybe the lady might have mental health issues. So I changed my mind from being angry to being sad. So that was one of the things that was one of my worst quilt show experiences I've ever had.
Wow. Sounds like an
Yeah.
expensive experience, too.
Yeah. And the promoters were very nice. They came by and thanked me for handling it professionally and not being upset. And I'm like, well, what can I do, right? But they ended up giving me like a free little duffel bag and T-shirt and all these things with their show name on it. So, it was a win-win. But that was crazy. The show's coming up again in March. I'm hoping not to see that customer again ever.
Can you give a quilting tip?
One of the remarks that I get a lot, people when they're looking for fabrics to go into quilts or how to start picking fabric, a lot of people will say, I'm really bad at it. I can never put something together. I always tell them start with a fabric that you love. You know how they will always say you can do a 3-yard quilt with a large main print, a smaller ditzy print, and a medium-sized print. My advice is not to really be too concerned about the different print sizes and sticking with that formula. My advice is to always start with the fabric you love and work out from there. Because even if you love this small ditzy print, you can go and find 3 or 4 fabrics to put with that in order to make a quilt. So the best advice I could always give when quilting, find something that you absolutely love and work from there.
Uh-huh. That seems so obvious to me.
It is, but a lot of people, they want to do things, especially if you're in a group. You get the group mentality. Right. If everybody's saying, I want to do a log cabin quilt, and you're sitting there going, okay, I'm going to do the log cabin quilt, but I don't want to do red, black, and white. I want to do purples and pinks or what have you. You get tripped up by what the other people are doing and not do what you really want to do. So my advice is if you want to do that group thing, pick the fabrics or pick the style, whether it be a log cabins on point or a square or however you want to do it, but do it the way that you envision it, not just what the group is doing. Because 9 times out of 10, it's going to turn out beautiful and you're going to love it because that's what you wanted to do. And then your group members are going to love it because you're happy.
Uh-huh. You had quilting as a hobby, and then it became your business. So you came up with Threads and You is EWE.
Yes, Threads is the quilt side, and You is the yarn side, due to you being, of course, the female sheep.
And did you go through a lot of different names and finally come up with that, or did that just pop in your head? It was so fitting.
Well, my sister will say that she came up with the name, but I know that I was thinking about Threads and You or had mentioned Threads and You, or we were talking and we both came together with Threads and You, but I think it was a brainstorming session between my sister and myself, and that's how the name was born.
That's fun to get to share that with her.
Oh, yeah, she'll love that because she'll swear up and down that she came up with the name, but I'm not sure. But yes, we'll say she came up with the name. My sister came up with the name.
And so you started going to shows first, or you had the website up first?
Yes, when I first started, I had the website. And after getting maybe 1 or 2 orders a month, when you're starting a business, especially in the fabric business, you have to have inventory, of course. So I started with about $100,000 worth of inventory, and not having the reciprocal amount of sales to correspond with the amount of inventory I have, I said, this is not going to work. So I had a choice of either start advertising heavily or trying to find a customer base by going to the shows. One of my friends that I knew that was already doing the shows, Richard of Global Artisans, now it's World of Crafting, he was instrumental in helping me with the shows and getting started on that path. I will always look back and think about the amount of people that you meet at a show versus the amount of people that traverse your website on a daily basis. It's far better, I think, to go to a show and have a booth and talk to 100 people per hour if it's a great show versus waiting for 100 people to push the button on the website. So that's how I started to build the business, by going to the shows and not spending dollars on advertising in magazines or having a publicist or a promoter do it for me. I met quilters in the places where quilters are, which are these wonderful quilt shows. And business definitely started to pick up after that. Another vendor that I have to be thankful for helping me is Donna of the Fabric Cafe. Donna and her daughter Fran. Donna was the first person that I met at the show. The vendor community is like a family. Everyone looks out for each other. Everyone really helps each other succeed at the shows. And I remember going up to her because I needed a little silver hook. And she just began to spill, all of this wonderful information, and just was so kind and so friendly. She's a very famous quilter that has several books. She's the pioneer of the 3-yard fabric quilts. She's done several books on how to do that. I'm always been grateful to her. And the other person I was mentioning, Richard of Global Artisans, he would always check in on me and text me and say, did you make it to the hotel? Are you safe? That type of thing. I don't know many jobs where your coworkers would do that for you. So, I'm always very grateful for having those people in my life.
Do you remember going to your very first conference where you were vending? Describe how exciting that was.
I don't know if exciting is the word. Nerve-wracking is probably more appropriate because, like I was saying earlier, there's so many pieces of logistics that you have to put into place. And you're a new person on the block. You don't know how you're going to be perceived. You don't know if the customers are going to like you and what you brought to the marketplace. The excitement comes once you've overcome those hurdles and you're up and running and the show is going on and people are complimenting you and telling you how great it is and thanking you for coming. That's one of the things that I am always surprised to hear when people say, well, where are you from? And I'll say, I'm from Texas. When the show's in Vermont or something, and they'll say, well, thank you so much for coming this way. I always think that is so great to hear. It's nice to be appreciated. Everybody loves to be appreciated. I think the first show that I ever did was the Mancuso shows. I did the Hampton Road show. And once again, the person that invited me was very helpful in making sure that I made it to the show okay and everything was good. So I had a lot of support my very first show. And in turn, one of the things that I like to do is mentor new vendors. And I am constantly giving advice and sharing tips on how to be a vendor. I remember one person crying, saying they can't believe it was so hard and just upset that their show didn't go as planned. And when I shared my little pearls of wisdom, saying things like, you met more people than you did sitting in your living room at home. You gave out cards, so that may translate into business. It's one of the tips I always like to share. The other one is that this may not be your best show. And I always say, it's not a bad show. It's just not my customer. So you have to go through these different areas of the country, do different shows if you want to do what I do, and find where your customer is and then narrow it down. And then you can be a little bit more successful in vending in different areas of the country where your customer is. So those types of things I've learned through the years of vending and mentoring and letting people know that, it's not always going to be perfect, but it's better than being at home.
Yeah. You mentioned when you started, you had quite a large inventory. So did you start out with a large inventory, or did it build up since then?
Oh, yes. Because I have basically two shops in one, I carry yarn and fabric. And I believe I probably started with 3 or 4 independent hand dyers on the yarn side and maybe another 3 or 4 larger yarn companies like Noro and Knitting Fever, people like that, that were representing several lines and not just an independent hand dyer. And then on the quilting side, I started with traditional fabrics, Aboriginal fabrics, Moda, Wyndham Fabrics, Benetex, all of the major fabric lines. And then I narrowed it down to now I carry probably about 4 or 5 major fabric companies, Moda, Wyndham, companies like that. But I also have expanded to larger amounts of Japanese textiles, Australian based designer apparel fabrics. I carry 100% linen from Tuscany. I carry just a huge variety of wovens, bark cloths, organic. I'm just a little bit of a fabricaholic. So I can't stop. If there's a unique fabrication out there to be had, I will probably carry it. But my main focus is the quilt fabric. But yes, there is variety and it has grown.
So is your customer base mainly US, or do you?
Because I have to do so many things on the domestic side, I decided early on not to do international. When I retire from doing the shows and going off the road, then I will open up the website internationally because that requires custom forms, things like that, a little more of my time. And right now, time is my enemy because I have to do so many things logistically.
Right. And on your website, you also have patterns for sale. Are they digital, or do you ship paper?
The pattern companies that I carry, I always ship print because of the designers that I carry. The major ones, Pattern Works, they don't produce digital. I carry pen and paper, and they do have PDFs available, but that's available on their website. And the patterns that I carry, of course, I'm bringing to the shows for in person. And I have to mention that the website is basically a placeholder. It really isn't the main focus of my business. It's there for people once they see me at a show and they want to go in and purchase something that may have sold out or something where they need a little extra. But I find that most people do most of their shopping in person because they have to see it, they have to feel it, they have to touch it. And online shopping is there because you know what you want to buy. You've already seen it, you've already touched it. You just need more of it, or you're familiar with that designer. You're comfortable purchasing that designer. You're comfortable with buying, that fabric line. You've made many fabric quilts with Moda fabric. So you're saying, I can buy Moda fabric online, no problem. But most of the success of Threads and You is in-person sales.
Yeah, we do love to touch that, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Shelly, is there anything else about your business I may have missed and you would like to share?
I just like to stress that my collections are carefully curated. A lot of my fabrics are luxury fabrics because I do carry the best of the best. The quality has to be really top notch. A lot of things that I carry, I worked with personally. So I never sell anything that I've never used. So I do like to try out the products before I showcase them or bring them to the marketplace. And with that regard, I just really want to bring the best of the best to the marketplace and also provide really great customer service. That's one of the things I think is the number 2, besides having great product, is providing really great customer service. I'm really good at matching fabrics for customers, getting projects together for customers. And of course, I always give big hugs. People gravitate to that. One of the things I'm most proud of, there's this little report that you get when you're using credit card sales. They'll give you an end of day report, and they'll let you know the amount of customers that are returning customers. And most of those reports at the end of the day will say anywhere from 35 to 65% of the customers are returning customers. And that is something that I'm really proud of, because we have so many choices out there as far as finding supplies for our craft. And when you get a base that really enjoys what you bring to the marketplace, that is everything. That makes it all worth it. Another thing that I found really exciting is that I was honored, I want to say around 2020 or so, but the Quilt Folk magazine, are you familiar with Quilt Folk?
Mm-hmm.
They featured me as the vendor in issue 12. That was a huge honor for me, because I was interviewed by author Meg Cox and Mary Fonz of Fonz and Porter fame. And they actually selected me out of all the vendors at the Paducah show as the vendor for their magazine. And I just was overwhelmed. So that was a huge honor for me as well, and one of the best experiences that I've had in the business thus far.
How thrilling.
Yeah, it really was. I really enjoyed it.
Please share where we can find you.
Yes, you can always find me at threadsandyou.com, but most commonly at the larger quilt shows and then some yarn shows. In June, I will be at the Kansas City Quilt Show, and the Minnesota Quilt Show will be also at the latter part of June. Road to Virginia will be at the very last week of June. So June is going to be a huge month for me for travel. But the Road to Virginia show will be in Richmond, Virginia. After that, the Great Wisconsin Show will be in Madison in September. I don't have anything in August or July that I can recall. And then October, of course, is the new dates for the Houston International Quilt Show. And that should be it, I think, this year.
Oh, that sounds like plenty.
Yes, ma'am.
My mind was crisscrossing across the United States. You're going to be all over.
Yes.
Anything else?
Just like to say that my legacy is like an unfinished product. I just don't know when I'm going to finish. And that is, I think, so exciting for me, because I just love the art of creating, but in a different and unique way than a normal artist would. You know? I don't always have to have that finished product. It's always the start of an idea or following through of an idea that gets me going and makes me want to get out of bed in the morning. So it's really weird, but yeah. I love what I do, and I hope it continues for as long as it can.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, Shelly, so much for joining us on A Quilter's Life. It was wonderful getting to know you and hearing your story.
Thank you again, Paula. I really enjoyed our time together. What a great thing you're doing, documenting all of these wonderful quilters and our stories, and we really appreciate you. Thank you again.
Oh, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, Paula. Have a great day.
You can find more stories on aquilterslife.com or subscribe on your favorite podcast player so each episode will be downloaded automatically. Also, I want to hear about you and your wonderful quilts. Please contact me, Paula Chamberlain, through the website to set up an interview. And as always, thanks for listening.